right around Huntley. He reaches. Oh, that ball's out. That's live. Back the other way. Sam Hubbard, the Cincinnati Kid. Hubbard's got a convoy. Chased by Andrews. At the 30, the 20. He will score.
To the end zone, down the field, and it is deflected and gone. Touchdown, A.J. Green.
Homer goes back to throw. Men are coming late. Looks right down the middle. There is Eddie Brown. He has it at the 35 to the 30. He may go 10-5. Touchdown.
Now the Bengals Super Bowl chances rest on his right foot. The kick is up.
Yeah.
It is good.
Corey Dillon, he's gone. The knockout punch, you're looking at it. 65 yards.
And they're back to throw as the blitz is on. Goes long, intended for Collinsworth. He has it down to the 20. Touchdown. And Chris Collinsworth.
Throwing the long ball. Deep down the field. Chad Johnson's got it. Touchdown. Cincinnati.
Look at Chase go. Oh my goodness, what a gear he just found. Chase for the touchdown. Wow, Chase is on the case.
It is no fluke. It is a fact. The Cincinnati Bengals are headed to Super Bowl 56. The play clock at 3. Shotgun snap. Carr throws into traffic. Intercepted. Jermaine Pratt has the football.
Yeah.
Coffin nails.
Bam, bam, bam. How about that?
It is NFL cut day. The Cincinnati Bengals roster officially down to 53. Welcome in, everybody, to Chatterbox Bengals. I'm your host, Craig Sandlin, joined by our friend Stone Shields. Stone, it's a tough day for many around the league, so want to be respectful as we go through this process. But the Bengals officially down to 53, and in their words, did so while maintaining roster flexibility. Your initial thoughts on the Bengals 53?
Yeah, obviously the roster flexibility certainly is an interesting phrase. We'll obviously break down who exactly made the roster. I think there are some kind of surprising selections in terms of guys that made the roster for Cincinnati. Obviously, offensive line, a position we're going to be talking a lot about. Spoiler alert, they only kept 8 offensive linemen. We'll see when that number increases. But overall, I think some guys definitely played their way onto the team based on their performance in training camp and, of course, the preseason. Mitch Tinsley obviously at the top of that list. But as far as my projection goes, I was off on several of these guys, so I definitely think there are a few surprising guys that found a way to work their way onto the 53-man.
Well, let's start with this roster flexibility conversation. And obviously, I think offensive line is probably the most obvious conversation to have when you're talking about roster flexibility. The Bengals end up cutting several linemen who participated, some of which had projected to make the team. Guys like Devin Cochran, guys like Andrew Coker, Caleb Etienne, got a lot of run. Jackson Kirkland, all on the waive list, along with center Seth McLaughlin. Only keeping 8 offensive linemen, to me, signals an interest in adding elsewhere. What do you read into only keeping 8 and the decision on who those 8 were?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember the last time I saw an NFL team only take 8. Usually it's 9 or 10 for Cincinnati, so I think you hit the nail on the head there. They're looking to add. Obviously, lots of people around the NFL are getting cut today and yesterday, so I think it's only a matter of time before they sign somebody along the offensive line. Obviously, we've all been paying close attention to Dalton Reisner. He came in and visited, didn't sign, hasn't signed yet. He certainly could be a guy that the Bengals are after, but Jackson Kirkland, to me, was the biggest surprise. He obviously got hurt, had that, I believe it was a tricep injury last year. I really liked the way he played in camp and in the preseason last year, and I think he was coming along pretty nicely here for the Bengals in 2025, but they let go of him. He had some flexibility as far as playing on the inside and the outside. Taking 8 guys they're not. I'd be shocked if they just rolled out with 8 guys and that was the plan. I think they definitely want to add 1, maybe 2 more. But as far as all the guys that made the team, I think those guys were all shoo-ins to make the team. You had your starters, right? And then you got Matt Lee, your 7th-round pick 2 years ago. He's going into year 2. And then you got your rookie there, Jalen Rivers, who saw his playing time increase, 5th-round pick out of Miami. And for a while there, it's like, is he potentially going to be a guy that's going to start at right guard for you? Could you perhaps have 2 rookies at your guard spots? But as far as the guys that made the team, I don't think there's any surprise there along the offensive line. One guy I do want to point out is Seth McLaughlin. They waived him. He's had a really interesting career. He was a solid center at Bama, but then, people that don't necessarily watch a ton of Alabama football will look at that last game he had against Michigan and say, well, he kind of cost them the game. He transfers, and then he goes to Ohio State and is the best center in the country before suffering that Achilles injury that sidelined him for the rest of the season and caused him to not be up to speed when, the offseason workouts began for Cincinnati. I view him as a guy that could potentially have success in the NFL, and I think the Bengals are certainly hoping they can stash him on the practice squad. And I think he could be a guy, probably not this year, but down the line that could have a future with this Bengals football team. But kind of getting back to your point, 8 guys, it's only a matter of time before they add someone. As far as who that someone will be, I really have no idea at this point.
Yeah, we'll wait and see. Obviously, the waivers today will play into this, but your unofficial depth chart across the offensive line as it sits today, obviously Orlando Brown Jr., Ted Karras, and Amarius Mims were your somewhat locks, I suppose, going into this preseason. Lucas Patrick expected, at least as of today, to be your starting right guard, and then Dalen Fairchild, one of the nice surprises and positives to come out of this preseason is how he has looked. They will be backed up, obviously, by Matt Lee at center. I didn't mention Ted Karras, apologize, but Matt Lee at center. And then, interestingly enough, Cody Ford and Jalen Rivers both give you flexibility to be able to back up at the tackle and guard position. So they have the ability to kind of figure out exactly where they want to add. But right guard certainly seems like the obvious position. And you mentioned Reisner already, and I'm sure there are other cuts around the league. One other position that I want to talk about in terms of, there were questions about how many people would the Bengals keep, and that's tight end. End up going with 5. Those are Mike Gesicki, Drew Sample, Tanner Hudson, Noah Fant, and Cam Grandy. There were a lot of people who said that they might stick with 5 because of the uncertainties at offensive line. Any thoughts on the keeping of 5 tight ends at this point, at least in the season?
Yeah, I like it personally. I think some people thought Cam Grandy could perhaps be on the outside looking in. We'll talk about him in a second. But Tanner Hudson, a guy, I know me personally, when the Bengals signed Noah Fant, I kind of was like, well, the writing's a little bit on the wall for Tanner Hudson. But ever since that point, when Cincinnati signed Noah Fant, Tanner Hudson really kicked it into gear during those practices, and he showed out in the preseason as well. If you remember that first preseason game, he was out there with the 1s. He also was out there with the 3s and Desmond Ridder and was producing with all of those groups. So, he did a nice job of proving that, hey, I'm a guy that should be sticking around here on this roster. And they all have kind of different playing styles, right? We talk about, Mike Gesicki kind of really just being a wide receiver but plays that tight end position. Tanner Hudson's definitely more of a pass catcher than he is a blocker. And then Fant, you're hoping he can do a little bit of both. And then Sample and Grandy are your guys that are definitely more blockers than opposed to, going out there and running routes and catching passes. But Cam Grandy, a former undrafted guy, I think when he was brought up on the roster last year, I think he really did a nice job of impressing the coaching staff. I've always been a big fan of him. Could you have gotten away with stashing him on the practice squad? Yeah, maybe. But I think the Bengals look at Cam Grandy as a guy that they have a lot of trust in. I know Joe Burrow has a lot of trust in him as well. And Drew Sample was a little bit dinged up. And if you're looking for somebody to play that Drew Sample role, I think Cam Grandy is that guy for you if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. So me personally, I am totally here for keeping 5 tight ends. What say you, Craig?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, some of these tight ends almost operate as additional offensive linemen. And so if you're going to only keep 8 offensive linemen, then it certainly makes sense. I wouldn't, again, no disrespect to anybody on the team or anything else, I just wouldn't be surprised if one of those tight ends or one of the defensive linemen that we'll talk about later are the casualties if and when the Bengals do add in free agency or waivers or whatever. But for now, it's fine. Try not to read too much into it unless there's a significant story. But it is, I think, at this point, it is what it is, and that'll help the offensive line. What is a significant story and turned into potentially the story of the preseason is at wide receiver position. Obviously, there were the locks there with T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Andre Yoshivas. Beyond that, how the depth chart would shape out was to be seen. Jermaine Burton and Charlie Jones ended up earning their way onto the team, but that last wide receiver spot was quite a competition between really three guys, but ultimately Mitchell Tinsley really showed the country in week 2 of the preseason what he can do, and really made the coach's decision a no-brainer at that point, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had heard the buzz coming out of training camp about Mitchell Tinsley, but, you know, me personally and you as well, like, we're not there every day, right? Like, we don't see exactly what's transpiring. At the end of the day, all we can rely on is what we're hearing Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor say. And then when we saw it pop in the preseason game, it was very obvious, like, oh, this is an NFL wide receiver. This is a guy that can help complement the likes of Higgins and Chase and Yoshi, Jones, Burton, all those guys. And after, you know, just a couple of series really in that second game against Washington, it was evident to me that he definitely should be on this roster. And just hearing, you know, Joe Burrow speak, I believe it was a sideline interview with Laura Rutledge where he was like, yeah, I hope he did enough to make the team, and he echoed those same sentiments after the ball game in his press conference as well. You heard Zach Taylor just say baller, you know, when talking about Mitchell Tinsley. So this is a guy that, you know, has had an interesting career, finished his college ball at, of course, Penn State, and then, you know, has bounced around, was with the Commanders for a little bit, and then, you know, has an opportunity here in Cincinnati. But just the way he runs around, the way he high points the football, his route running, his hands, his physicality, like, he just looks like an NFL receiver that should be on the active roster. And it's unfortunate for a guy like Isaiah Williams because he was really solid for you last year, was a good specialist for you as well. And, yeah, he had to drop the first game against Philadelphia, but it really wasn't him losing this job. It was kind of Mitchell Tinsley saying, you know what, this job is mine, and going out there and taking it. And I think Bengals fans are really excited about what Mitchell Tinsley can do. It's not like he's your second wide receiver, right? You have a loaded room already, and if he's like your quote-unquote last receiver on the football team, that's a pretty good problem to have if you're Cincinnati.
I'm really interested to see how they end up using him and how often they end up using him. Obviously, depending on where you look and whatever sources you believe, he's going to be somewhere between the 5th and 6th wide receiver behind, obviously, T, Jamar, Andre, and I guess Jermaine or Charlie. But I really wouldn't be surprised if we don't see him significantly more often, especially given the trust that Joe Burrow started to show him. Jake Browning obviously showed it during the game against the Commanders, but Joe Burrow going out on national TV during that Monday night game, talking about him wanting to have him on the team. We heard from practice the following week about how much Joe was throwing to him and how he was getting run with the firsts. I mean, it really is yet to be seen in terms of what this Bengals team expects to do with Mitchell Tinsley, and we probably won't know fully until a couple weeks into the season. But, you know, for him to go out and beat out incumbents like Isaiah Williams, like Kendrick Pryor, who you mentioned, I mean, that says a lot about what he was able to do. This is a guy who, again, was waived twice in the past year, who now finds itself on the opening day 53-man roster and was one of the better stories of the Cincinnati Bengals in 2025. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this one, but the last position, I guess, that we'll mention real quick is the running back room. Chase Brown, Samaje Perine, and Taj Brooks round out that room. Do decide to move Kendall Milton as part of the waves. I thought Milton looked really good in week 3, but that's just a room at this point that I think you've got too much talent and you're not going to keep 4 running backs. And so you have to hope that Kendall Milton clears waivers and you can bring him back for the practice squad.
Yeah, absolutely. They usually, do they keep just 3 typically at that running back spot? Have they ever kept 4 in the past? I don't know if you know off the top of your head, but I feel like last year.
I don't know about long term, but I know last year we looked and it was just 3 and then they had the 4th on the practice squad.
Yeah, and if you're just keeping 3 and if that's the plan, then like you mentioned, it's kind of obvious that you're going to keep these guys, right? You know, Brooks, well, I mean, Chase Brown, I think he's really going to make a name for himself this year. I think he certainly did in the city last year, but I think he can really burst on the scene nationally as a great running back in the league. So obviously he was a no-brainer. He's your RB1. P. Ryan, you signed him in free agency. As long as he, hadn't completely lost a ton and still was able to be that guy on third down that could pass protect, he was going to be a lock to make it, and you're probably not going to cut a rookie despite the fact he was cut in the 6th round. So I, too, like Kendall Milton. He was up for a couple of games, game or two maybe last year. That 3rd preseason game against the Colts, he looked really, really good. But, yeah, I mean, considering what you have there at that running back spot, there really wasn't much of a battle. Maybe if one of them really popped, you think about taking 4. But, I'm happy with where the running back room is for Cincinnati. But I really hope Kendall Milton is a part of that practice squad. And even Gary Brightwell, I think, that first preseason game, he showed a little bit of juice there as well. So I think those 2 guys, I think Cincinnati would like to have on their practice squad, but particularly Kendall Milton.
Yeah. Last note on the offensive side of the ball, Bengals stick with 2 quarterbacks as they did last year, Joe Burrow and Jake Browning. Desmond Ridder, a casualty of the cuts. We'll shift over to the defensive side, and this is really where you get some of the bigger surprises, I guess, in terms of makeup of the team. We talked about 8 offensive linemen being kept. Well, on the flip side, they keep 11 defensive linemen. How much of this, Stone, do you think is part of the Trey Hendrickson plan, and the fact that obviously he's got to work his way back into game shape and being ready to go? How much of it is just these were the 53 best guys and they deserve to be on the team and we're going to add elsewhere, and it may have to be that they move to the practice squad? And then the other piece of it is how much of it is a little bit of, we talk about it in baseball with roster manipulation, like maybe they really believe in Howard Cross and Eric Gregory and want to make sure that they stay available on the practice squad for them. And so they stay on the roster for today. And then when they add, they hope that way the waivers have gone through enough that they can keep those 2 on the practice squad. Yeah,
it's a great question, one that I don't know the answer to. My gut would say that, Zach thought, and of course his staff thought, that these were the best 53 guys, and that comes with keeping 2 UDFAs in Howard Cross and Eric Gregory. I thought one of them would make the team, but to see both of them make the team definitely was a surprise to me. To your point, could it be, you put them on the active roster for now, and then if you add, then you're hoping that you can stash them on the practice squad? That certainly could be a part of it as well. I think as far as Trey Hendrickson goes, again, I don't know for certain, but my gut tells me that he's going to be just fine and ready to go come week 1. I know, obviously, you went live yesterday and broke down the entirety of the Trey Hendrickson situation, but, for Bengals standards, this kind of was done a little bit early, as crazy as that sounds. In my mind, I was thinking, this would go into a couple of days before that week 1 game, but they get it done here. So he has a couple of weeks, about 2 weeks, to get his feet wet with the team, and I'm expecting him to start pretty quickly for Cincinnati. So I don't necessarily think the reason they kept 11 was to add a little insurance behind Trey Hendrickson. I think he's going to be ready to go, but I definitely am intrigued about Howard Cross and Eric Gregory and what their role could potentially look like for this team. And you also have 2 guys now going into year 2 at Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson as well. Could the 2 UDFAs this year perhaps get in front of those guys? Probably not Chris Jenkins, but McKinley Jackson. We saw him late in some of those preseason games, so that certainly is very interesting. But that defensive line, you've got, all your stars in place, quarterback, receiver, running back, edge rusher now coming back for 2025. But how they play along the offensive line, obviously the defense as a whole as well, but particularly there in the trenches, in the interior, stopping the run, is really going to determine how far this team can go in 2025. And there's a lot of names in that group of 11 that are really going to have to step up for Cincinnati if they want to get to where they want to get to.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a bold take or not, but at least based on the initial 53, outside of like wide receiver, D-line really feels like maybe the deepest position on the entire team right now. When you look at the talent from top to bottom, it may not have the star-studded names outside of Trey Hendrickson like the wide receiver room does with T and Jamar. But if you look across there, TJ Slayton and BJ Hill are both very proven veteran players who can bring quality reps to your defensive line. Shamar Stewart showed flashes in this preseason and during training camp of what he can be for this defensive line. creating havoc in practice. Chris Jenkins showed really good flashes towards the end of last year in terms of stopping the run and tackles for losses. McKinley Jackson showed similar flashes. Joseph Asai and Miles Murphy have both shown that they can be quality pieces in terms of a rotation along that defensive line. And when you add in, like you mentioned, Eric Gregory and Howard Cross, I really, as weird as it is for me to say, knowing how I came into this season and how I even progressed through the preseason, for me to look at this on paper, at least, that almost feels like a strength of this team at this point. The question, of course, becomes, if I'm an opposing team, I look down the line at that secondary and I say, well, good luck getting to me in time, because my wide receivers are going to get open in a couple seconds and I'm going to be able to get the ball out quick. So I guess, ultimately Zach Taylor and Al Golden talked about wanting to stop the run and really focusing on boosting this defense's ability to stop the run. They reworked the linebacker room. They obviously added at the defensive line and in the trenches there. But if you look at secondary, and again, on paper, these names look, I'm thinking to myself, okay, Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, Josh Newton, even Marco Wilson and DJ Ivey have all shown flashes of making me believe that they can be NFL corners. But none of them are really, like, as of right now, screaming shutdown corner. And none of them have really shown the consistency, I guess, that I would like to see. But it goes back to what we talked about after one of the games this preseason of, at the end of the day, as a defensive back, you have to trust everybody else on that defense to do their job. And if you can't trust them to do their job, it makes your job that much harder. And so I'm reserving the right now to change my take. I'm slightly optimistic that that this defense might be better than we are actually giving them credit for, if they're actually able to do what they have been talking about and they have better plans than what we've seen in this preseason, which has been straight vanilla. And they've admitted that it's straight vanilla. So am I overreacting to this roster on paper to be slightly optimistic that they can be a decent NFL defense, or should I prepare myself for another bottom 5, bottom 10 defense performance this year, Stone?
Look, I'm all for the optimism. Look, I'll be the first to admit, during the preseason when the opposition's running up and down the field on you, it feels like, it's 2024 all over again, but even a little bit worse. But, hearing Zach Taylor and the defense, Logan Wilson, leaders on the defense, Slayton, BJ Hill talk, like you mentioned, very vanilla what they're doing. And, they seem really confident that they're going to be able to flip the switch when it comes time to play against Cleveland. You've heard the reports coming out of practice that the Cincinnati defense oftentimes will win the day against the offense. It's pretty, 50-50. They've really done a great job competing against the offense. The offense, as we know, the best in the National Football League. So I don't think you're crazy at all for the optimism. There's definitely players across the team and in the secondary that have flashed, but it's been the consistency of all guys being on the same page at the same time and not making critical mistakes, right? You can give up first downs. That's going to happen. It's part of football. But if you get completely beat over the top and you're giving up those explosive plays on a regular basis, something that we saw last season and certainly saw in the preseason this year in 2025 for Cincinnati, that's where you run into trouble. And something you and I have talked about as well, this doesn't need to be a top 10 defense, right? You're definitely going to lean on your offense. That's where a lot of your money is being allocated as far as an organization goes, and that's where your skill is, and you're going to rely on them to, outscore the opponent. But the defense just has to help you out a little bit, and the defense didn't really do that last year. They came on a little bit stronger at the end when you face some weaker quarterbacks, but this isn't a defense that needs to be a top 10 defense for you to get to where you want to get to. They just have to show a lot of improvement from last year to this year. People were freaking out about the preseason. Initially, I was as well, but kind of in a similar boat as you. After kind of looking at this roster and hearing some of the comments of Al Golden and Zach Taylor, I feel a little bit better about it right now. But in a couple of weeks, if you let Joe Flacco hang 30-plus points on your head, we're going to be hitting that panic button immediately.
Yeah, look, if you look at last year's total team stats and look at points allowed over the course of the year, right? So on a defensive side of the ball, The worst defense in the league, according to points per game, was the Carolina Panthers, and they were at 31.5 points a game, which is insane. The Bengals were seventh worst, I guess is what we'll put it at 25.5 points a game. Is it crazy of me to say that if you can get me to like middle of the pack at like 23 points a game, that this becomes a viable 12 to 14 game winning team and a legitimate playoff threat?
I don't think that's crazy at all. You know, I hear this notion that, oh, the offense isn't going to be as good as they were last year. I have a tough time, agreeing with that. Now, on the other side of that coin, you got, well, the defense isn't going to be as bad as last year. But, I mean, look, offensively, it's the same guys. Yeah, you have some, changes along the offensive line, but your core is in place. You got the tight end coming back as well, which I think is very critical. And, it's another year of Joe Burrow, and he just had the healthiest offseason that he's had, the most productive training camp that he's had as well. So I think the offense is going to take, at minimum, another step, at minimum stay the same, and at best take another step. I think if the defense can just improve ever so slightly, and, if you break down all the games last year, there were some games where they didn't give up a ton of points, but there were some games, like, the Charger game is one that sticks out to me, where you give up a ton of points, especially early in that game, both the Baltimore games, right? Granted, against great quarterbacks in those games. But, yeah, I just think just a little bit better is what Al Golden needs to do. And I think that's something that Zach Taylor anticipates can happen, considering that the only big change, he brought in TJ Slayton, but really we're running it back with the same group, and we've got new leadership with Al Golden. There really hasn't been a ton of change as far as personnel goes. Yeah, you have rookies coming in. You signed TJ Slayton. He's going to be a starter for you. But overall, not like you've got a ton of new bodies there. Defensively, they're really banking on Al Golden to just help them tick it up a little bit and be a little bit better. And I'm totally with you. If they can just improve and get to that middle of the pack range, I think 12-plus wins is very much attainable for this team.
One of Al Golden's priorities coming into this team, we heard about after the third preseason game, was reworking the linebacker room. They end up going with 5 linebackers at this point, 3 of which new to the team, and Demetrius Knight Jr. and Barrett Carter, who were draft picks in this past year's draft, and then Oren Burks, who they added in free agency. Logan Wilson rounds out that crew, along with, somewhat surprising, Shaka Hayward as your 5th linebacker. He beats out Joe Giles Harris and Muma Njongmeta as the 5th linebacker. I know a lot of people really became enamored with Njongmeta last year. Joe Giles Harris was brought in to add some depth to that position. So any surprise with Shaka being that 5th linebacker? And what are your expectations for this linebacking crew for 2025?
I was a little bit surprised by that. I didn't expect just kind of, when Muma was playing, he was playing late in those games, and you didn't have the same kind of level of buzz around Njongmeta. I, like everybody else, fell in love with him this time last year. He was kind of the Mitchell Tinsley of 2024 in some ways, right? Kind of the darling of training camp that not a ton of people expected to make the roster, that ultimately ended up making the roster. This year, I wasn't surprised he was on the outside looking in, but they went with youth in Shaka Hayward over Joe Giles Harris. Giles Harris, kind of a journeyman. He's bounced around to a ton of different teams, and I didn't have a high level of expectation for him. And I thought the way he played in the preseason, he kind of blew me away a little bit. I was like, oh, this guy can still play. He can still move around. He impressed me. And I thought maybe they would give the nod to Giles Harris over Shaka Hayward, but I guess, youth, maybe upside, the determining factor in that decision from Zach Taylor, Al Golden and company. And I look at that linebacker room, there's a lot of youth there, right? Hayward, was he a rookie last year, Shaka Hayward? Was that his first year? I believe it was his first year. So he's a second-year player. Barrett Carter's a rookie. Demetrius Knight's a rookie. And then you got 2 veterans there in Oren Burks and Logan Wilson. But I was just talking about how there wasn't a ton of turnover necessarily on the defense. But if there is one position where there was, it's definitely linebacker, with Jermaine Pratt obviously out, Akeem Davis-Gaither out as well. And you got some rookies there. You got some young guys. You bring in Oren Burks, who just won a Super Bowl with Philadelphia. So they're really relying on Logan Wilson to kind of spearhead that unit, really be the leader and help teach those guys. I have always been a Logan Wilson guy. past couple of years haven't been up to the level that I think we anticipated Logan Wilson playing at. I think he was banged up and playing through some injury last year, which certainly affected it. But when I look at Al Golden, the thing I am most excited about is how he's going to develop these linebackers. Because if we remember, obviously, last time he was here in 2021, he was the linebacker coach, and that unit was one of their strongest units on that Super Bowl team. So if there's a guy that can get Logan Wilson playing to how he was back in 2021, it was Al Golden. So lots of reason to be optimistic about that group. And I think Barrett Carter certainly flashed in the preseason games. Demetrius Knight wasn't at his best necessarily in the preseason games, but all you've heard coming out of camp and practices is that he's really blown people away. So I think that's a position in particular where you have a lot of optimism, and I think Shaka Hayward hopefully can carve out a nice role for Darren Simmons and be really valuable in special teams, similar to what Mumajong Maeda was able to do last year.
Absolutely. You mentioned a lack of turnover, in one room where we did see that lack of turnover almost completely is at the cornerback position. Dax Hill, Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, Josh Newton, Marco Wilson, and DJ Ivey are your 6 cornerbacks that make the team. They beat out other competitors. Jalen Davis was waived or terminated today, I guess is the official term for that. And Braylon Lux was waived earlier today as well. I don't really know that there's a whole lot of surprise there, other than that feels like a room that could use a boost from a pickup here post-cut day.
Yeah, no surprises there. You brought Marco Wilson back in free agency. I didn't necessarily expect them to do that, but the coaching staff really likes him. They like what he can do on third down. They like what he can do in man coverage. Obviously, Al Golden runs a ton of that. But you're looking at guys like Cam Taylor-Britt, where he needs to be a lot better than he was last year, right? He got benched for a lot of the guys that you just mentioned. He had, I think, 2 different games where he was pulled by Lou Anarumo. So you're really looking at him to get back to the form where he was when he was a younger player. Because I remember when he burst on the scene as a rookie, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this guy could be a lockdown corner for you. And the physicality and the ball skills they've been there this whole time, but sometimes, upstairs, not always in the right spot, making some mental mistakes here and there. So you're really relying on Cam Taylor-Britt to kind of get back to that form, that trajectory that he was at really early in his career. But Dax Hill, he's my favorite guy in this room. And the question with him is just how he's going to look after the injury from last year, the knee injury. I think Dax Hill is clearly your best DB. This is just my opinion. There's a reason Cincinnati picked up his 5th-year option. They believe in him. I think he's made of all the right stuff. And if the Bengals are going to get to where they want to get to defensively, I think Dax Hill is going to be a major, major factor. I'm just hoping that he can kind of pick up where he left off prior to injury, because it was early in the season, but those first few games, Dax Hill was playing really, really good. And one of my hot takes that I've kind of put out there in the past is that if Dax Hill plays the entirety of the season, I kind of think Cincinnati makes the playoffs. So I've got really high expectations for him, and I'm hoping that they're going to play him in different spots, right? He can play the nickel. He can line up on the outside too, so he's going to show that flexibility and that versatility. But I'm just really hoping he can kind of pick up to where he left off, and that knee injury is something that he's completely recovered from, and he looks like the player that we saw before he got hurt.
Yeah, and Dax Hill wasn't the only one with an injury last year. DJ Turner broke his clavicle. DJ Ivey missed time. I think Mike Hilton missed time. Cam Taylor-Britt was banged up for most of it. But, here we are hoping that we can kind of rely on the same group, but keep them healthy and hope that they can hold it down. And I think a big piece of them being comfortable in their role is the safety position. And that was a position that many flagged as room for improvement for this year. Not a whole lot of change, though, if we're being honest. Geno Stone and Jordan Battle remain your anticipated starters. Tyson Anderson and PJ Jules, who turned into a fan favorite over the course of the preseason, round out your safety position. Dejon Anthony, worth noting, was designated for return when he was put on the injured list earlier today with a hamstring injury. He'll miss at least the first 4 weeks, but is eligible to come back later on in the season when he is healthy again. So how they manage his return is yet to be seen. But for me, at least, and we'll talk about names later, safety and offensive line are probably the 2 positions that I'm most anticipating a waiver claim within the next couple days.
Yeah, I would agree. Certainly congratulations to PJ Jules. He was on the practice squad last year, undrafted guy out of Southern Illinois, and now he is able to make the roster here for the Bengals to start out this season. Will they roll with him? Will he be a guy that, they look to as their probably fourth safety, or are they looking to add to that room, like you mentioned, via a waiver pickup? But, the safety room really does concern me. I didn't think it was in the best interest of the organization to move forward again with Geno Stone. I thought it was kind of a situation where you kind of, lick your wounds a little bit, say, yeah, we signed him to this 2-year deal. Didn't exactly work out, but the Bengals are, relying on him. They're betting on him again. They have belief in him, and Geno Stone is made out of all the right things. He obviously restructured his contract. He's taking less money. When you hear him talk, he says all the right things. He seems to be a great leader as well, so I'm really pulling for him, but that position really gives you some cause for concern. And, I've always been a big Jordan Battle guy. He, of course, had, one of the worst plays of the preseason where he kind of just let Jaden Daniels get into the end zone. It kind of looked like he thought they were just kind of doing like thud at practice, and he just didn't even try to hit him. So that was kind of an interesting play. But I completely agree with you. Like you said, we'll talk about a few names. I know the former Kansas City Chief is a guy that a lot of people are talking about at that safety spot. But, it's a room that there's a lot of question marks there, and you kind of just have your fingers crossed, and you're hoping that they can develop a little bit better and be stronger for you. So if you have anything to add to the safety position, by all means do that. But I do, before we fully move on, want to hear from you about going back to that corner spot real quick. Are you a Newton guy or a Turner guy if you're picking that third starter?
I really liked what I saw out of Fig Newton last year. I realized that he's young. Obviously, his rookie season coming out of TCU had some growing pains for sure, but I felt like out of all the corners that were playing last year, I felt like he actually showed the most flashes out of everybody in terms of his skill and his ability to play the pass. So I'm personally a fan of Fig Newton. I also recognize that I'm not there at practice every single day to watch how these guys are participating and practicing, but I really liked what I saw out of Fig Newton last year and his pass defenses. And I wouldn't be shocked to see him get a lot of run this year. Lou Anarumo wasn't afraid to make in-game changes when guys weren't showing out the way that they needed to. And, certainly Fig Newton was one of those guys that benefited from those additional runs, but I liked what I saw out of him. I thought, again, that he showed some of the better flashes of anybody on that secondary. And for me, I'd like to see him get some more run. Overall graded last year with PFF as a pretty solid defender with a 60.9 overall grade, which is, quote unquote NFL average. And, at the end of the day, I think that in the 500 or so snaps that he played, I thought that he played pretty well. And I'd be interested in seeing him get some more opportunities this year as the year progresses. But I think so much of it depends on, health of the guys and how everybody else steps up. Because, again, I think that a lot of last year was jaded by the cornerback room's lack of faith in the safety room and forced them to play in a way that maybe they weren't comfortable or didn't want to. And, Josh Newton ended the year with 5 pass breakups in his limited reps. That's a pretty significant number. So I would love to see Josh Newton, and maybe he'll earn his way into a more prominent role. I assume that since you're asking that you believe in Fig Newton yourself.
I do. Yeah. Between him and Turner, I'm not fully convinced either way, but I would lean towards Newton as being that third guy. But make no mistake, all the guys that made the team, and, it's corner, they're going to get nicked up. They're all going to play. But for now, I would lean Cam Taylor-Britt, Dax Hill, and Fig Newton to be the three corners that I roll out there. I love all the things that you mentioned. He's got a feistiness about him that I know the coaching staff really likes a lot as well. So, he was a later round pick, I believe a 5th round pick out of TCU, but if he can show that he can run with the real burners in this league and be disciplined, be in the right spots when he's supposed to be there, do his job like everybody needs to do defensively for Cincinnati, I think he can have a really productive second year, and the Bengals certainly are going to be leaning on him.
Yeah, I think if you can get the Geno Stone of 2023 back, where he had 7 interceptions and was really kind of a ball hawk for the Ravens, I think that opens up the ability for this DB room across the board to play in a more aggressive manner versus what I think happened last year, where they were too much in their heads and worrying too much about what everybody else was doing. So I do think that even DJ Turner, I think, has an opportunity to perform much better this year, but a lot of it is going to rely on that safety room and them being in the right spots and being able to help out on that play. So Al Golden, we saw in the national championship and throughout last year, really is not afraid to play man defense, is not afraid to put his guys on an island. So you certainly hope that your DBs have the confidence to do that, because oftentimes, at least in my opinion, the most important thing when you're talking about a cornerback's success is confidence. It's not even about talent. It's about confidence in playing the role.
Totally agree. And Newton seems like he has that.
Yep. Last position of note, I guess, the special teams battery per se last year struggled at times. Bengals decide to waive Cal Adamitis, and they'll go with undrafted rookie free agent William Wagner. Evan McPherson said that he didn't notice a difference when either one was there, so I'm not sure if there's much to read into here, but certainly a position that's going to be more vital than people recognize or will acknowledge sometimes. So Cal Adamitis, a victim of wave, and William Wagner, your long snapper for the year.
Yeah,
I don't have any comments.
Yeah, I don't have much on that one. Wagner's a Michigan guy, so that's not ideal. But whoever it is, just get it to Ryan Rico and get it down so Evan McPherson can kick it through the uprights. So I don't really have a take on that one.
All right, we'll leave it on this, Stone. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to see everybody's final cuts at this point. I've been paying attention throughout the day, but haven't seen everybody. So with what you've seen, at least, give me a name or two that you would like to see the Bengals pursue now that these waves are done from somewhere else that, didn't make their prospective 53-man roster.
I think Mike Edwards is the name that a lot of people are talking about. He was released by the Chiefs. Spent some time playing with the Bills and Buccaneers last season as well. He's 29 years old, has that experience, and he's been a part of championship football, and that to me is probably the biggest intrigue. He's been a part of 2 Super Bowl winning teams, and the Bengals have a lot of youth on the team, but particularly on the defense as well. I've kind of always been saying, like, hey, I think, adding a veteran, whether it be at a safety spot or a cornerback spot, really could be valuable to help learn these, get these young guys along. And mind you, we don't have Mike Hilton, who I guess could be a name that you could bring back now at this point since he was released by Miami, but you just don't really have that guy, especially in the secondary, that can really be, a veteran presence that's been there, done that, and can help bring this team along. I think Edwards could perhaps be that guy. I know a lot of Bengals people online, a lot of people that cover the team, the beat writers perhaps, are mentioning him. So he's kind of the top name to me. And then Audric Estime, the running back that was waived by Denver. We spent some time, of course, talking about the running back position. I feel pretty good about it, but I also feel like Audric Estime is a guy that should be on an NFL active roster. And, he could perhaps fit into what the Bengals are doing offensively. He's 5'11", 221, has speed, but he's a big guy too. 4.1 yards per carry, so he could be an interesting addition as well. But obviously, the running back position not as important as safety right now for Cincinnati. So the top name for me at this point, just kind of looking at things online again, like you, I don't know exactly who all has been released here at this point, but Mike Edwards has been the hot name so far today. All
right, as we wrap, I guess one question for you. Mike Edwards obviously was waived earlier in the day, so maybe you didn't even see that this guy was waived. But is there a reason you would prefer Mike Edwards over a guy like Tony Jefferson, who was waived from the Chargers earlier today? Jefferson posted the highest safety PFF grade of all safeties in this NFL preseason.
Yeah, I did not see that, and that stat is very intriguing. So, yeah, I think really just somebody to add to that safety room that's been around, that has the experience. I'm not exactly sure where Jefferson is at in his career, to be completely honest with you, but a guy that's coming off a season
old.
like that. He's old guy? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's 33. He's been in the league since 2013. Yeah. So, you'd have to have faith in your younger guys to be the heir apparent. But if you're trying to win now, which is what you're sending as a message by signing Trey Hendrickson to a 1-year deal, a guy like Tony Jefferson might fit in a 1-year contract here.
Sure, and Justin Simmons is another guy that still has not signed yet, and I still think he has good football ahead of him. We've talked about him before on the show as a guy that I think Cincinnati should go after. Now, what his price tag looks like, obviously probably different than the two guys we just mentioned, but I think it would behoove the Cincinnati Bengals to add a veteran to that back end of their defense.
Yep. Another guy like Isaiah Simmons, who's that kind of flex between linebacker and safety, he became available, was waived earlier by Green Bay. Feels like somewhat of a fit. He started his career as kind of a edge/outside linebacker, transitioned to more linebacker, and then he's been tested at safety some. There are plenty of names, and I think ultimately what it comes down to, Stone, is that the roster today, the 53-man that we see today, is not the 53-man roster that we will see on September 7th in all probabilities. But as always, Stone Shields, myself, Reed Mouse, and others will be here to take you through any breaking news as it comes up. Make sure you tune in to Chatterbox Bengals every day. Stone Shields putting out great content throughout the season and even the preseason now as we lead up to September 7th. And be sure to tune in with us as we do a live watch along with every Bengals game right here on Chatterbox Sports. If you haven't already, please click the like button, subscribe, and follow along on all of the social media channels. So until next time, for Stone Shields, I'm Craig Sandlin. This has been Chatterbox Bengals. Hoo-day, baby.
Alrighty, got the stream ended.